So it's only going to be 2 stories today. I decided to lop one off to save time. A couple stories that really indicate to me what this margin looks like. There's a guy named Matt Russell who's a farmer in Iowa. He's active with the Drake Agricultural Law Center. He's selling at a farmer's market. He also sells, is trying to scale up and sell to people like Hy-Vee, which is the Safeway of Iowa, if you will, or Cisco, trying to do this kind of large-scale production. His family grew up raising commodities, so he really likes the commodity style and wants to be at that large scale. But he says it's very important for him to keep selling direct. And the reason is when he sells direct, he's establishing a price with a direct consumer who will pay that price. That means he doesn't have to budge as far when the big institutional buyers come knocking. A lot of us have heard the stories of the stores or the big chains that give you a good price for a while and then they change their mind and say, we'd like you to lower that a bit. Matt's ability to direct market gives him the leverage, and also his ability to coordinate with other producers gives him leverage to fight those pressures off when some of the big buyers come through. I think that's really a very key part of why direct contact and not losing that element in a cluster of food businesses really keeps the system stronger. Secondly, I'd like to talk about Lawrence Meats, which is a processing firm in Cannon Falls, Minnesota, about an hour south of Minneapolis, St. Paul. Mike Lorenz is a very good business. He and his brother took over a 50-year-old meat processing plant in a small town. And when they took it over, they invested in a new processing plant. They do very high-quality organic meat production for Organic Prairie. They actually do all the Midwestern meats for Organic Prairie. They do custom elk, custom buffalo, custom cattle for their neighbors. Very high quality work, but Mike also is very aware of the fact that he has to charge 35 cents a pound for each pound of beef he brings to his system, and he's competing with big systems that charge 3 cents a pound. And what I really like about Mike is he understands these economics, he talks about them openly in a public way, and he says we can still find niches that work at 10 times the price. And I think that's, again, this creativity, this ability to network through. One of the things that Mike has done, I think, is so successful is that he started out with his processing firm and wasn't getting enough volume for grass-fed beef that he felt like it was really a good product for himself. So he spun off a new company to bring him grass-fed beef. It's called Thousand Hills Cattle Company. Todd Churchill, who started that, was a consultant to Mike Lorenz. Todd realized that he could play a role going to farms, brokering animals 1 or 2 at a time from small producers around the Midwest, bring them to the shop. They could be processed in enough quantity to make up a volume for a labeled product in the Twin Cities markets. So Mike not only runs a successful business, he spins off a successful grass-fed beef operation, which is now in turn spinning off a joint distribution network with a Latino Anglo co-op called Home on the Range, that's going to produce poultry at a small scale, but try to process it in their own processing facilities. This idea of one business, Robin's been doing this too, one business spinning off others, this kind of complexity and clustering is much more exciting to me than single by single business victories. And I think that we really have to keep that vision intact. I've been arguing for several years that local foods is probably the best path we have toward economic recovery. Mostly because the food system is so effective at taking wealth out of our community now that the relationships we build, these soft relationships of building trust, of learning to use the back door, of really kind of figuring out new systems that really build wealth in communities, we're going to do that faster with food than we are building windmills or building widgets. And the stuff we learn by doing food is actually going to pay dividends as we get to the bigger economy. So I really think this is not just a good thing to do for food, but now that we've bailed out the banks nationally, it's time for us to also redirect the economy so it builds wealth and capacity in our communities as well. I think food is the vehicle for that. It's the number 2 household expense in the United States. I also want to say a quick thing about local, because I use the word local mostly because when I say local food, people sort of smile and say they understand what I'm saying. It's not quite what I believe in. I really prefer a different term that's very hard to argue because it's not in the popular language right now. I like local food, but also it's not a matter of drawing a wall around a locale and saying all the food has to come from this locale. It's not a matter of counting food miles in my mind. I use the word local as a euphemism in some ways for what I think is a more accurate term, which is community-based food systems. Kellogg Foundation embraced this terminology for a few years. Land Stewardship Projects use this still today. I use this. It's about developing relationships of trust and loyalty that allow people to trade with more flexibility, more resilience, more compassion, more long-lasting sustainability. Those community ties allow Pachamama to be a local business in the sense that they're developing local relationships with with coffee producers abroad that allow me to buy coffee in terms where I say it's a fair trade, it's something I have some connection with, it's not simply a commodity. And to my mind, that's really what we're trying to build. I said that already. I also do not use the word supply chain or value chain very often, I should say. And this is a real key business concept I think we should kind of examine carefully. The concept of value chain, which we use a lot, this is a very good model. It's a very linear model, but it's a very good one if you want to learn the value added at each level of the chain. If you want to know what a processor adds to the product a farmer produces, it's a good model. If you want to know how much a distributor adds a value, this is a good way to parcel those things out and come up with a calculation. The trouble, of course, is that the people in the middle of this chain end up with the real value. And the other thing that you'll notice very quickly is that the producer and the consumer do not negotiate directly with each other in this model. And that means supply and demand can never really balance because supply and demand are not conversing with each other. Again, another reason to have those direct relationships between producers and consumers. If you look at this economically, as USDA publishes data about this, what they call the marketing bill, the maroon area on this chart is all the value that the middle players in that system take out of the system at the expense of the producers and the consumers. And again, the systems are very effective at taking wealth out of our communities. We have to learn how to interface with those systems in ways that don't take wealth further away. Right now, farmers are getting about as much money farming, and this is commodity farmers, are earning about as much money now as they did in 1950. Today, it's 1/5 the value of the retail value of food. In 1950, it was 41% of the retail value. That difference has been taken up by the marketing industry and the processing industry. That's one of the reasons that a linear approach to this does not work. In my mind, what we want to try to create is not a value chain or a supply chain, it's a value network. This is, I believe, going to look something like what La Montaña does, where consumers are members of a food cooperative. They might be investors in an investment fund. They might be investing in a processing plant. Those arrows all represent flows of money, of skill, of connection between players in the system. This is what I think a good local economy looks like. This is how you have a high multiplier, and I think this is really how you have lasting chance for really converting our American economy into something that's got some strength. It's all about forming clusters of businesses that develop loyalty to each other, that stay together over time. You do think of community as the lens through which you measure whether the economic activity we foster is actually having the benefits we want in our community. That's really where the local comes in the most strong in my mind. The other dilemma is that often production is the most efficient at very small units, while for processors and distributors there's an efficiency of going to scale. That leads to a question. Should farmers get bigger to suit the processors, or should the processors get smaller to suit the farm efficiencies? No clear answer for that, but we typically only ask one of those two questions. And I think that's a very key negotiation for us to think about over time. With that, let me skip here to just want to show a couple of quick examples that I've run into that really kind of offer me promise about business clusters. Actually, I'll do three here. I think I got time. Greens Grow Gardens in Philadelphia. Mary and her husband, 25 years ago, were restaurateurs in rural New Jersey. They said, we're doing a nice thing. We have a nice restaurant. We think we can do more with our life with a social mission. They sell their restaurant. They move to inner city Philadelphia. They get a 1-acre parcel of land. The city of Philadelphia is so thrilled to have developed, they give them a 99-year lease for $1 for this land. Today, their farm, after some federal grants from USDA, some investment, today their 1-acre farm in inner city Philadelphia generates $650,000 worth of sales. Now, that's not all their product, but what Mary and her husband do is that they broker food from 75 farms in the region to local restaurants, and they do it through their site. They've taken an old brownfield site, they put a cement cask on that to contain the pollution, they put soil on top of there, they have higher level hydroponic production. You can see the plants look pretty happy. This is their cooling unit. It's a framed 2x4 building with insulation in it, an air conditioner jimmied with, so it will keep everything at 37 degrees year round. This is their cold storage area. Very low tech. USDA plans told them how to build this. With that, they're able to generate $650,000 worth of sales to local firms. Terrific use of land, energy, creativity, and again, a cluster of firms that develop some mutual dependency on their facility and on selling into the Philadelphia market. I mentioned Home on the Range Poultry, a Latino Anglo co-op that's forming right now in Minnesota. This is an idea where the farmers have said, we notice a lot of the good food options rely on low-income Latinos working at minimum wage to thrive. We want something else that actually has the hope of what they say is taking existing resources and rearranging them for a new outcome, which is that Latinos build wealth. 1/4 acre site producing free-range chickens. Here's an example of one of the barns. Again, built with 2x4s, 2x6s, covered with plastic, an open area for the chickens to roam and feed sprouted barley, feed from the soil itself, from the grasses in the itself, from minerals, from grains that are added. They want to keep a 1/4 acre site for lots of reasons. One, it's a family-sized site, so they think people can actually control that site over time. Secondly, as the market changes, they can add or delete sites very, very readily. If a family gets enough land to buy land, they can pick this site up and move it to their new land they purchase. It's a very resilient, very flexible, very family-based approach to production that can be very efficient. They hope that with 30 of these barns in the next few years, they'll have enough production. They can have one processing plant that will be Latino-owned that will actually allow them to process those at the scale that is more efficient. Again, a really good example of going large by staying small and being resilient because the units are small enough to be flexible to changing conditions of climate, fuel availability, and everything else. Rehi is the guy, he's a Guatemalan, worked with some coffee cooperatives in Guatemala before he came to the States. He started a coffee company in Minneapolis, St. Paul called Peace Coffee. He is now the kind of mastermind of this cooperative. And finally, I'm working with Viroqua, Wisconsin, which is another kind of parable of how we're going to do some of these things, I think. And this will not necessarily be new to you, but it's a very exciting thing in my life in Wisconsin. A town of about 4,000 people. A factory owned by somebody outside closes down overnight, and 120 of the best jobs in town are gone. Printing and packaging factory. So the head of economic development for the county calls up the owner of the factory and says, what are you going to do for me now that you've taken 120 of my best jobs out of my town? And he blusters for 20 minutes, just not sure what to say. And he finally kind of cools down and says, what would you like me to do? And she says, sell us the factory for really cheap. And he does. So now they have taken over ownership of a 100,000 square foot building that's been certified by an inspector to be clean enough for food processing. It's going to be a regional food processing center. Again, the driving idea is we have small producers. We want them to stay small, but we want to have a volume we can sell to the La Crosse hospitals, to the La Crosse public schools, to the regional schools. 2 produce industries will be using the same equipment, leasing it, and working with small growers to ramp up enough volume to get to big buyers. One of the first tenants to come in is the local hospital that's starting a fitness center. So inside the food processing center will be a place to exercise, classroom space, and a real incredible chance to network the idea of exercise and fitness with healthy eating, healthy lifestyles. It also helps the local hospital get more committed to buying food from local farms. And here's a couple pictures of, I hope. Yeah, there's a picture of the building. It's just a factory building right now, but I think what's really cool about this is that in July they bought the building for a price I can't disclose, but it was really tiny. by September, they started opening up the building to bids. On December 15th, I got a call saying, we've filled 96% of the capacity of this building already in a small town of 4,000 people. It's really remarkable interest and growth in a terrific way of reusing kind of the refuse the industrial economy has given us for a better purpose. If you go on the Crossroads website, I'll give you the address soon, there's a new study I did of the Minnesota food industry. And I just want to highlight 3 themes, which we've been talking about today, but the 3 themes that came out of interviews with multi-million-dollar firms doing business in food, being the cutting edge of the new industry in Minnesota. We have to plan, this is all, basically everybody's saying this is all about reciprocal relationships. That's what keeps us going. We have relationships of trust with our suppliers, with our customers, the kind of relationships that Robin described, that Wendy's described. All day this has been happening. We're planning for resilience. We're planning for the fact that we may not have oil in 20 years. We may not know what the price is. We may have global warming or global climate change that really changes the conditions. We have to plan as if we don't know what the conditions will be, because we don't. And also it's the kind of networking of resources, the recycling diagram I showed before, really showing this recycling of resources, not only recycling paper and waste products, but also recycling wealth, so it comes in, stays home, and does some work in the locale. To me, that's how we build health, wealth, connection, and capacity in our communities. And here's the website address, and I'll be around here during the mixer if you want to say some more. Thank you.